Hi, everyone. Dorothea Hendriks here, your coach in public speaking and in presentation skills. My guest today is Tim Dumas. I've known Tim for a number of years and I've worked with Tim. Tim is the founder of Service Leadership, which is an executive coaching and strategic planning company with the purpose of striving for greatness by bringing out the greatness in others. Tim is also a certified forum chair with McKay CEO Forums. When he's not coaching in the boardroom, you can find Tim on the football field coaching the South Delta Sun Devils. He and his wife Stephanie and their 6 children live in Tsawwassen, which is outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. As I mentioned earlier, I've known Tim for a number of years and I'm always impressed. He inspires me because whenever I meet him and whenever I speak with him, he's so open. He has this inbuilt curiosity and he has a zest for life that is quite catching. And he has a strong love of family. All the things that I admire enormously. Welcome, Tim. Welcome to my Zoom interview this afternoon.
What a wonderful introduction, Dorothea, and thank you. I'm so grateful for you because not only are you the speech coach here, you're my speech coach. And, I am so grateful for everything that you've added to my life over the last number of years.
Oh, well, thank you for that compliment, but it's been a pleasure. And you are going gangbusters. I mean, just today you were giving a lunch and learn earlier this morning to people in England, and then you were giving another workshop later on. And my goodness, in 2 days you've done 4 or 5 sessions. You're following in Tony Robbins' footsteps, who says he just booked 8 speaking engagements, or what was it, 3 a day, or whatever it is, as many as he could. But here's to you. I have a question for you, and I actually have a number of questions for you. So I'll start with this one. You've spent a number of years as an accountant in the financial sector, and then as chief operating officer and partner in Jack's Beer, Wine, and Spirits, which is a family business. How did you transition from being a chief operating officer? And I know you traveled all over this province visiting different stores. How did you transition into becoming a strategic leadership coach?
You know what's funny is I don't even know if it was much of a transition at all, because
Mhm.
really that's what I was doing in the company that I was working with. Certainly with Jack's in the family business, I was a strategic leadership coach at Jack's, acting as a chief operating officer. But ironically, it didn't change that much because my greatest passion was and is the people. And sure, I was excited about selling the products we sold, but really my passion is growing the people. And I realized that is during my time there. And I realized that, hey, that we're doing this very well within Jack's. And as I began to grow, I was able to grow up people around me there. So they ended up taking up my job. And that now I'm doing that with all different kinds of companies throughout North America, and some cases the world. But in the end, leadership is leadership, and strategic coaching is exactly very similar to what I did there. Now I just get to do it with a host of different companies and a host of different industries.
Yeah, all over the world. So, what exactly did you do, in a small way when you were at Jack's? What did you do as a strategic leadership coach, since it was part of something that you did anyway on a daily basis?
So I always thought I wanted to be a coach when I was growing up. As you know, and you mentioned, I'm a high school football coach now, and I always loved sports. And my goal was to take sports as far as I could take it as an athlete and then become a coach. But there was one day I was walking off the field in Erie, Pennsylvania, playing for this little college called Mercyhurst College. And I was walking off the field. Our head coach, his 2 little kids ran up to him and gave him a hug. They were about 6 and 8-year-olds at the time. And as him and I kept walking after he embraced them, walking towards the meeting room where we're having a meeting after practice, he looked at me and said, "I love getting to coach and influence the young men on our team. But during the season, it's difficult because I never see my kids unless they come to see me at practice." And that really hit me. Obviously I didn't have kids at the time, but I knew I wanted to have a family. And my dream of being a coach died that day. And it died really for the better part of a decade. Even as I went into leadership in different organizations, I really didn't understand that I could be a coach in the business world until we hired a coach in our business at Jack's Beer, Wine, and Spirits. And when we hired that coach, my eyes were opened. And I sat him down one day and I said, this is what I've been waiting for, to understand how we can coach people within the business world. And that was the day everything changed for me, where my dream actually didn't die. My dream was actually re-enlightened more than a decade later.
Isn't that interesting? So you you had a very narrow focus of what being a coach actually was until, well, was that after a decade, I suddenly realized that the world is, it's wide open, wide open. The coaching field is wide open. I on your website, I think you mentioned about the stresses that business leaders face. And what are some of those stresses and the solutions that you as a coach, maybe one or two examples, solutions that you give as a coach to help them alleviate that stress and help them move forward?
It's funny, I was having lunch with a colleague today, and we were talking about the stresses of business owners and business leaders. And we joke that, 80% of the issues, the pain points, all have to do with leading people. If you look at different organizations, if we can get the people right, that strategy, I won't say it's easy, but we can get the strategy right if we have great people. My good friend Kevin Lawrence, who's also a coach, he jokes, he said, if you can figure out how to get the right people, and if you don't get the right people, it's like playing ice hockey in the NHL with a bunch of pond hockey players. And in our organizations throughout the world, we're going into battle each day. We're going into that NHL game with pond hockey players. And sometimes that's because we've hired pond hockey players. And sometimes that's because we as coaches haven't actually trained them and onboarded them to be great. And so half of that's on us and half of it's might be on the people, but really digging into the people and seeing how we can support them and hold them accountable to be better. And you might ask, well, how might we do this? And I know it might be cliche, but one of the words I utilize all the time is love in the workplace. My great friend Steve Farber wrote a book about it. That's love is just damn good business. And really what love is in the workplace is love is not all rainbows and butterflies and puppies. Love is supporting people, holding them accountable to achieve their goals and then in turn the company's goals. If we truly love someone, we will have that hard conversation. We will support them and we will challenge them to get to that next level. And in turn, really that's the magic of what's the pain point in all businesses. And then that's the answer to hold them accountable and support them to achieve great things.
Love, that's an interesting word because often we romanticize love. We don't think of it in terms of business. What would be an example of love in business, Tim?
So one example of that is, in companies that I work with, often we bring into the company dream sessions. And dream sessions are simply supporting a person personally to achieve their personal goals. I first started this and realized how transformational it could be when I asked somebody what their personal goals were. This was in a performance review. And the young woman looked at me, she said, Tim, not only has no one ever asked me this in the workplace, no one's ever asked me this, period. No one's ever asked me what my biggest, boldest, audacious dream was. And really, if we think about motivating, inspiring our people in our company, I don't know about you, but I'm not super inspired by a company that says, hey, how can you help us achieve our targets? That's all we're worried about. And I'm not alone in that. People aren't inspired by that. But when we say, how can I help you achieve your goals and dreams so that we as a company can achieve ours together? That's when the magic happens. So when this one woman walked into my office and we did this one day, I asked her what her dreams were and she didn't know. She said, I'm gonna have to get back to you. Next week, she comes in again and she says, Tim, I still don't know. Well, it's a week later, she walks in my office and she said, Tim, I think I know what it is, but it's unrealistic. I said, let me be the judge of that. And she says, Tim, in all my life, I've wished I could have a new car, but I couldn't possibly afford one. I came from a family that never had a new car, and I don't have an income that could afford a new car. And all I said was, can you just prove yourself right? I just need you to prove that that's true, that your limiting belief is true. So go down to the car dealership, talk to a salesperson, then talk to the finance department, come back to me next week and prove to me that you couldn't possibly buy a new car. Well, you can probably imagine what happened the following week. She takes me by the arm, runs through the parking lot, and jumps into the driver's seat of a brand new shiny blue Mazda 3. See, nobody had even asked her that before. Nobody even asked her to dream audaciously. And really, as a company, is that not what we do? If you think about some of the greatest companies, they reinvented what business was in the world. Think of Apple, think of Disney, think of the Wright brothers putting people in flight. That's what they did because somebody asked them the question to dream bigger. And if we really want to grow as a company, those are the questions we need to ask.
Very powerful when you ask somebody about what their goals are, what their dreams are, because as you say, when we spark them, they will spark the organization, right? I love that story. It's a beautiful story. I was looking on your website too, and you have a process called the coaching leadership process, where you help your clients. Now, is that something similar to what you did with that particular gal when you were doing your performance review? What is the coaching leadership process?
So similar, but the coaching leadership process is really understanding the definition of leadership and how to lead. There's really three ways that one can lead another. One can lead by training them, one can lead by mentoring them, or one can lead by coaching them. And when I talk to leaders in the business world and leaders in general, most people do not understand the difference between the three. So training somebody is simply telling them what to do. Do this, do this, do this, and everything will go well. Mentoring them is drawing on my past experience to help them understand what to do, telling them a story about how I did in the past, how it worked out well or how it didn't. Coaching them is simply asking the questions to help them bring that out of themselves. Now, the thing most people don't understand, or most people don't know, is psychologically, the data shows if I tell somebody what to do, it will take them 9 times to learn it. Now, people all the time come to me like, Tim, I can't believe it. I told this person 3 times to do it, and they didn't get it. And I'm like, no, I can't believe it because it'll take you 9 on average. So training takes time. Now, the second way you can do it is mentor. And the data says that you can cut your time of training in half by mentoring somebody. So if you draw on your past experience, it'll normally take them 4 or 5 times for you to share that with them before they understand. Yet the magic of coaching and asking questions help them bring that out of themselves. It cuts that down to 1, maybe 2 times. So when I talk to companies about this, there's people whose eyes light up and they're like, well, I'm never going to train somebody again. I'm like, well, hold on just a minute. Because if I come to your company and it's in the morning and I'm like, hey, can you tell me where the bathroom is? And they say, I'd like to coach you through it. Where do you think it is? I'm like, no, can you just tell me where it is? So it doesn't work in all instances. But what does work for leaders is understanding that. And when they're thinking through leading somebody, thinking, is there a way I can coach them through this? And if not, is there a way I can mentor them? And then my last resort is how can I train them? And imagine if our leaders really understood that. Imagine if they understood how it works in the brain, because it moves into from your subconscious to your conscious when you ask questions. Your subconscious brain is that part of your brain that when you walk, it picks up your calf muscle and your quad muscle, etc. It makes a lot of sense why we would have a subconscious. It's that part of your brain that you drive home from work and then you forget about what turns you made and how you got there because your brain is subconsciously doing it. When we ask questions, it digs deep into that conscious part of your brain and it implants on it. And that's why the coaching process is so valuable.
Now, powerful, absolutely powerful. I love how you describe that because I You had lots written down about how you help people with their personal values and their purpose, the understanding leadership style. But I love the fact that you can tell somebody, you can mentor somebody, you can coach somebody, and the difference, between among those three. You were in university and you were in sports, probably wanting to be a football player at one point, an aspiring football player. And so you've been an athlete and worked with athletes, and again, in the introduction, you're coaching young athletes. Do you find similarities between coaching players in the field, on the sports field, and coaching executives in the boardroom?
Absolutely. It's the thing that's the same as the drive, right? That, coaching, it's never easy, but you have to be coachable as well. And part of that coachability is the drive for greatness. When I've gone into organizations and we help strategize with the company, we set them, make sure their values are aligned, they've got the culture, and then they really put that out to the team. They say to the team, this is our culture. We're going to care about you. We're going to support you. We're going to grow with you personally, and we're going to grow as a company. But to do that, we're going to also hold each other accountable to greatness. What always happens, almost always happens, is there's a few people that said, hey, I'm out. And you know what? That's okay, because it's obviously not the right environment for them. And so when we find those people that are committed to growth, and I really think I love the line, a book called Coactive Coaching states this line that says, people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. People are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And what I take that to mean is 99% of the world wants to do a good job and wants to do great if we give them the opportunity. And really what coaching is, whether it's on the football field or in the boardroom, is me as the leader being the conductor to give them the opportunity to create a great symphony. And that's what's similar about both areas.
And again, I'm going to say I used the word powerful before, and I think that is not only powerful, but something that's vital. I know from my experience in the workplace that sometimes your boss, your manager wants you to be great, but they're not providing the platform for you to be able to do it, right? And it's the same on the sports field. You got to have the platform, you've got to have the personalities, and then everybody really wanting to do it. You've got a mentor. Well, you have a number of mentors, but John Maxwell, I know you've mentioned John Maxwell before. And I took something from one of John Maxwell's quotes: the difference between average people and achieving people. And you're talking a lot about coaching achieving people, but the difference between average people and achieving people is their perception and response to failure. You've worked with both kinds of people in as a coach in your work environment. Is that true that average people and achieving people have a difference in how they look at and deal with failure?
Well, before I ask that question, I'll give you some examples. Walt Disney was a cartoonist for the Kansas City newspaper. He was fired for lacking imagination as a cartoonist. The greatest Imagineer of all time was fired for the very thing he is the greatest of all time at. Oprah Winfrey was reading the evening news on a station in Baltimore. Fired because she had no presence on camera and didn't have a personality fit for TV. Oprah Winfrey, probably, arguably, the greatest TV personality of all time, fired for that exact same thing. Jerry Seinfeld, the first time he did a stand-up act, was booed off the stage because he was not funny. Arguably the greatest sitcom of all time, Seinfeld, was booed off the stage for not being funny. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team because he wasn't good enough and became the greatest player of all time. So do I think that how people respond to failure shows their leadership, shows how their achievement? Absolutely, positively, without a doubt, because I've never met an achiever that was had not failed along the way. The only difference is they pick themselves up and they go again. You mentioned John Maxwell, and I have a good friend who I've got to meet John Maxwell, but my good friend got to have lunch with him. And I said, how did you possibly get John to have lunch with you? And he said, well, Tim, it was simple. I asked. And I'm like, you're meaning to tell me that all you did was ask him, and he said, yeah, I'll be over for lunch. You don't even live in the same city. And he said, no, but I did ask him 88 times. And he said, I failed 87. And on the 88th, I succeeded. The only difference between his success and his failure was his internal fortitude to keep on going. And it really reminds me of the great mantra by Jim Collins, who talks about the Stockdale paradox. And the Stockdale paradox simply states, to succeed, people have to understand the brutal facts of where they're at, the failures they've had, move on and do the thing day after day they need to do with unwavering faith that will succeed in the end. The keys are understanding the brutal facts of where you are, the failure. With unwavering faith, you will succeed in the end. Walt Disney never once thought he would fail. He almost went bankrupt like a dozen times. He truly knew what he wanted and needed to do for the world. So really what it comes down to is understand that brutal fact of your failure and doing what it takes with unwavering faith to succeed in the end. And those people, I love getting tough feedback. It's not easy. I cry myself to sleep with it sometimes, but the tough feedback is what makes it better. And Dorothea, you're one of the best of giving compliments and tough feedback. You've not been easy on me as I've been your pupil as a speaker. You've sometimes shaken your head at me going, Tim, what happened? But do you know what? You made me better. You make me better. And that's really the key in overcoming those little failures and understanding that it's a key to your future success.
And achieving people, that's what they, and it's interesting because a failure in that, just listening to you, the way you even say the word failure, it almost has motivation in it, right? It didn't work this time, but I want it. I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do it again. And so it's because we need that to move forward, right? It's interesting. So it's not really a failure at all, but it's something that we need to overcome, we learn from. Yeah, and thanks for the compliment, by the way. And yeah, I'll be tougher. I guess you said it with a bit of a smile. I guess I wasn't tough enough, right? Oh. All right. As a coach here, and I love the story too about asking your friend asking John Maxwell for lunch 88 times. It's cool. It's cool. As a leadership coach, as a strategic leadership coach, what have you found? Because I'm sure there are some commonalities here over the years as you've worked at coaching and now you're moving more into helping with strategy and planning in organizations. What would you say is the biggest roadblock that organizations have faced so far from your experience?
You know, the biggest roadblock organizations face is, I think it's really three, if I can put into three, and I call it the 3 C's of leading within an organization. And it's the 3 ways you can lead, which we already talked about. But the 3 C's in an organization that every organization struggles with a bit and needs to work on are these things: clarity, caring, and communication. Most companies, when I get in there and look under the hood, I'm like, what's the issue that if you really were able to identify this and get over it, what would take you to the next level? And they're like, if we were just more clear about our job and what specifically we could do for success. So many people go to work every day really not understanding with clarity what they need to do for success. So in any company, we look at the job description, the job scorecard, and ask a simple question. Is it extremely clear, number one, what they need to do each day, what this person needs to do? And number two, what their key performance indicators are, their metrics. And you've heard me talk about sports before, and I love baseball for this reason. Every baseball scoreboard in the world has the same 3 metrics on it, from T-ball all the way to the major leagues: runs, hits, and errors. Baseball players are unbelievably clear that we need to get more runs than the other team, and then 100% of the times we'll win. If we get more hits and make less errors, most of the time we will win. We know that those are the 3 metrics in baseball that we need to work on day in and day out. You know that the vast majority of employees in a company don't have any idea what their top 3 metrics are, like those baseball players. So number 1, it's clarity. Number 2, it's communication. And communication is often mistaken for lack of communication, and not enough communication, rather than not enough effective communication. There's many companies, if not most, actually communicate too much as opposed to too little. But when you communicate too much, you can also get in the way of doing good work. If you think about, Dorothea, if you were trying to get some work done at your desk and I stood over your shoulder and said, "Hey, Dorothea, what about this? And what about that?" And if I just talked to you over your shoulder all day, that noise would drastically negatively impact your ability to get work done. So communication in a company, understanding the rhythms are incredibly important. One thing I was able to implement into Jax was just a communication rhythm of knowing when we can communicate together. So for example, we put in this rhythm, and it was, if you need to talk to me right away, call me, or if we're in the same office, come get me. Call me if it's 911 you need to know today. If you just need an answer within 24 hours, text me. If you don't need an answer for 72 hours, email me. And if you don't need an answer for a week, we'll have a standing one-on-one meeting every week where we can go through any of those things, and we're going to make a running list. Do you know that that drastically decreased the amount of communication we had and drastically increased the effectiveness of the communication, simply by having that communication plan, which many and most companies don't actually have? So clarity, communication, and really when you put those 2 things together, it shows that you care. It's not that other people who don't do them don't care. They just don't understand the keys to get to that place where we certainly care about each other and feel like we have each other's back. And clarity and communication do that.
That is so powerful. And I've, over the years, spoken and coached so many people. And sometimes when we're trying to book time, they're inundated, they're run off their feet with meetings. Like it's meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And you're going, how can you possibly get anything done and be productive? And the meetings sometimes are not productive at all. But just what you're mentioning here about determining about the communication, how urgent is it? And then setting a plan according to the level of urgency. That is priceless, Tim.
And I have to give kudos to a woman I worked with at Jack. She was the regional manager, and it was a Friday afternoon. It was maybe 5 o'clock or so, and I had a long drive home from the last store that I was visiting. So on my way home, I had about a close to an hour drive home. I called her. I said, "Hey, how's it going?" She's like, "Good. How are you?" And I said, "What's going on?" She's like, "Nothing much. Did you call me for any specific reason?" I go, "No, but I hadn't talked to you in 2 days, so I just thought I'd check in." And it was on the phone, so she didn't deadpan look at me, but I just can picture her through the phone, deadpan eyes staring at me, going, "Tim, are you lonely?" And I stopped and I thought, I'm like, I'm on a nearly hour-long car ride by myself, and I'm lonely. I'm calling her because I'm lonely. And imagine, and part of that's because, my personality gets energized by being around people. But I thought long and hard about that. And I thought, how often in my work life have I called people for no reason just because I was lonely? And it really interrupted, whether it was their personal time or their work time, and didn't allow them to get the job done in a great way. I think about all the times I've done that. I think about all the times many business leaders do that, and especially business owners checking in, which is all good and is a very noble task. But if it's not done at the right way and the right time, it can derail the leadership of your company.
Powerful, powerful advice. Great story. Great story. Thank you for sharing that. From time to time, Tim, we have doubts, fears, frustrations. I gather you've probably had some of your own doubts, fears, frustrations over the years. How do you deal with them when they pop up?
I've only had 18 of those today. So it was a good day. I think as human beings, we all have limiting beliefs, right? And I really think it's a team that helps us get to that next level. When you're a part of a team, and as I go on my, coaching journey now, somebody asked me like, Tim, why don't you do this coaching thing by yourself? You could have your own company and why don't you just do it by yourself? Why did you join a team? And so I'm on a team called Lawrence and Company. And when somebody asked me that, I said, do you know what? It's for one specific reason. Oh, many reasons probably, but the biggest reason is I get to sharpen my sword with other great people every day. And when I fall down, I got, all these other people to help pick me up. And being on a team to me is magical. I want to be a part of a great team. So how do I get over it? I think part of it is personal mindset. And having resilience rituals where if I know I'm getting in a funk like that, I can, I know the things I need to do, and I might need to step away. I need to go for, I need to go for a walk or run or a bike ride, or go just get away from that to get that out of my head. Or I'm surrounding myself day in and day out with some of these game-changing people that are all going to pick us up and get to the next level. And I'm very blessed to have so many game changers like that in my life. And Dorothea, you're one of them. But really, that's how we overcome those limiting beliefs, is together. Because there's, people say to me all the time, they're like, oh, Tim, you must not have any limiting beliefs. It's really hard that I have it. And I'm like, what do you mean? Every single person has them. It's just like failures, how we decide to overcome them.
Yeah. And how great. I know that you do sports, you're really into activities. So that is one way to make sure you get yourself out of a funk. And then surrounding yourself with people, and as you call them, game changers, always being around people that can make a difference. They move you up, right? They don't pull you down. It's not like you're going to talk to somebody and they go, oh, I agree, and you're down in the funk. No, what they do is they pull you up in the opposite direction. I mean, I think that is so important for all of us. And I loved hearing that story. As a coach, what would you say is the strongest, well, or not just one, but what are the strongest skills or attributes that you bring to coaching your clients?
You know, I don't know what that specific one is, but I'll tell you a funny story about one. Somebody once told me, Tim, you're the coach, you're the only coach I've met that cares the most, but tells me all the time that you care the least. And I said, that's funny. What do you mean? This person said to me, they said, every time I try and give you an excuse, you tell me I don't care. And they said, but I know that you care deeply. I said, I do, but I don't care about what your excuses are. I care about if there's a brutal fact that you want to give me, which is another way of stating an excuse, but it's stating an excuse in a way that you're going to, and telling me then how you're going to overcome it. The brutal fact is this, I'm going to do this next. So I guess if you were to say, that greatest attribute is getting into that room and just saying, I care about you. I'm going to support you. How can I support you? Tell me what the brutal fact is. Tell me how you're going to overcome it, and tell me how I can support. And, I talked before about the Stockdale paradox. Another way of putting it that some people haven't heard is the neutral thinking principle. And neutral thinking was coined by a guy named Trevor Moawad. And he really said there's three ways you can think. You can negatively think, you can positively think, and you can neutrally think. And really, when we bring that neutral thinking to the table, that's when value happens. The best way to describe neutral thinking is this. Everyone's heard the Apollo 13 story, right? The rocket ship goes up in outer space, loses its engine, loses all its power. The astronauts on board could negatively think, hey, we're all going to die. Why even try? There's no point. They didn't think that way. They could think positively. They could say, hey, don't worry. NASA has the smartest people in the world. They're going to get us back. You don't worry. They also didn't think that way. They neutrally thought. They simply understood the brutal fact of where they are and then did the little things they could do with their bubble gum, shoelace, and tape or whatever they had on board to do relentlessly what they had to do to get back to earth because they had unwavering faith that they would get back. And they did. And so they neutrally thought. So what do we bring to that leadership is neutral thinking and then strategy. Understand the brutal facts, think neutrally, and now let's get to the strategy. And one thing I'll add to the strategy is, one thing most people and most companies don't do with strategy, they don't think long-term enough. They don't think, where do we want to go in 1, 3, 5 years? Even in the long term, in 20 years, what do we want this company to be known for? Once we've left the company even. And, if you don't look far enough ahead, it's kind of like learning to drive. If you remember way back when we were 16 learning to drive, the driving instructor probably told you, don't look just over the windshield, because when you course correct way off one way and way off another. But if you look way onto the horizon, your small course corrections will be so small you will barely even notice it. And it's the same in businesses, but most businesses do not have the internal fortitude to dream long-term, to think long-term, and to strategize long-term. And if there's two things that I could bring to organizations, it would be that long-term strategy, strategic thinking, and neutral thinking.
Which then pretty well answers, I think, the next question that I had here. If you could go back to the beginning of your business as an executive coach, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? Those are two things that you'd probably bring in immediately, right?
Those are the two things. And the third thing is one thing I've already talked about a little bit is game changers. And I'll tell it in this way. When I got into family business in my mid-20s, I remember learning from others in the family business. They said, hey, Tim, here's what you got to do to be successful. Put your head down, work hard, don't come up for air, show up at 6 a.m., leave at about 8 p.m., or you'll be okay. Basically, work your butt off and work hard. And really, is that good advice? Yeah, it's pretty good advice, but it's not the only advice. So for more than the decade of early in my career, I never came up for air. I never asked anybody for other perspectives. I never learned from other people. I worked hard. Nobody worked harder, but I didn't look for other perspectives. So if I could go back, I would come up for air. I would look to surround myself with game changers in all areas of business and in life. Who's been there, done that, and who's great at it, so I could learn quicker to implement those principles quickly.
I think surrounding yourself with game changers is absolutely critical, because it's very difficult if you're throwing yourself in the ring to run your own business. You need to have that support to see what other people have done, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And I'm going to toss this out to you, but in a way, we've already answered it. The 3 tips that a newly minted entrepreneur can put into practice that will help them define their vision, because you talk about long-term planning and having that vision. What are steps that somebody who's new at this and just beginning to surround themselves, what can they do to help them define their vision? What steps can they take? Because if you don't have a vision, a clear vision, it's pretty difficult to get yourself going and succeed.
Number one, it's difficult. And number two, it doesn't happen overnight. And so
Yeah.
some people, when we get into strategic planning, we look at all the potential questions and all the things we can answer as it relates to vision. Now, we need to identify what's the most important today. So what could a great leader do at the beginning is first identify their priorities. What are my priorities first personally? And then in our business, what are our priorities in our business? Most business people, I talk to them and I'm like, what are your priorities? They're like, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And they start listing them off. I go, how do you possibly do all of those? And they're like, oh, no, I don't. I go, well, how many do you do well? And there's a great proverb that just says, how does the great person get a lot of things done? Well, you simply do one thing and then the next and then the next. So number one, it would be to prioritize in your life, whatever those priorities are, whether it's your family, your spouse, your work, or other things. Really understand those priorities and put those into your calendar and live that way. And then for your company, understand what your priorities are as a company. Most companies struggle with the shiny penny syndrome, right? All of a sudden they get into a meeting, they're like, we should do this, let's sell this kind of thing, and then let's do this. And then all of a sudden they're going all over the place and they're really doing nothing fast. So first is priorities. And second, what's a great way to do it and really understand how to think long-term? I call it the eulogy drill. And this is more of a personal one, but you can use it as a business too. So we'll first talk about personally. If I was going to be the person to give your eulogy and I said to you, great, can you just give me the 10 points that I'm going to need to talk about? And you'd hand them to me. I'd be like, 1, 2, count them out. I'd be great. Point form, awesome. Unfortunately, I can only talk about 7 of these. You might say, why? I'm like, I don't know if you're living these 3. So when you do the eulogy drill, it really helps you understand what's important and what you really want to be known by at the end of your life. What are we working towards? If we don't have something we're working towards, it's just as good as me telling you, hey, I'm going to go on a vacation to Florida without a GPS or a map or look at any road signs. Do you think I'll get there? Well, I don't think so. And you certainly won't get there as fast as you could if you had a road map. That's basically what your 10-point eulogy is. As it relates to a company, you could do the same thing. What does this company want to be known for? What do you want your customers to know you for and as? What do you want to be best in the world at? And mark those things down. And those are going to be the North Stars that you work towards. Too many companies work towards profit. And I'm not saying that profit's a bad thing. Profit shows whether you win or lose. But I don't know any customer that walked into a store or a business and said, I'm just helping these guys with profit. No, they're helping me to solve a problem.
What are your values? What are your priorities? What are your top 3 priorities, Tim?
Priorities are simple, and I'll tell it with a little story. I have a personal coach, and he said to me one day, he asked me the same thing. He said, what are your priorities? And I said, they're simple. When I was a young child, my maternal grandfather sat me down. He said, Tim, as long as you remember these 3 priorities in life, you'll be okay. He said in this order, number 1 is your faith, number 2 is your family, and number 3 is football, the 3 Fs. And those have stuck with me to this day. My priorities are faith, family, and football. And football is now an analogy for both, coaching football in the community, but football is my analogy for work. And so those are my priorities. And when I sat down with my coach one-on-one a number of years ago now, he said, great, Tim, can you show me in your calendar how those things are your priorities? And I pulled up my calendar and he looked at it. And I looked at it. He said, if you didn't tell me those were your priorities, would I have any idea? And he would have had no idea. See, at that point in my life, my priorities, I knew what my priorities were, but I wasn't living them as effectively as I could. My family, my spouse, my kids were getting the scraps of what work had left. I put work into my calendar because that's what you do. But I didn't really intentionally put my faith, my spouse, my kids into my calendar. They just kind of fell in there. And from that day forward, I've really worked hard to month after month find places to make sure I put those in and then to work my work around that. That doesn't mean I'm not going to work. I'm not working during the day and anything like that. It just means when there's important times, I make sure those are in my calendar before anything else.
You're living your values. Yeah. Often we talk about our priorities just as you were mentioning, and then when your coach asks you and you're looking at your calendar and you don't know. And I have to say it's probably me right now, right? And me and a number of other people as well, so really sitting down, what is it that you really, really value, you prioritize? Thanks for sharing that. Faith, family, and football. I love that, the 3 Fs, the 3 Fs. So your maternal grandfather, would you say he was your mentor? in life, or have you had a number of mentors that have influenced the directions that you've taken over the years?
Oh, I've certainly had a number of mentors, but funny story about my maternal grandfather is when he passed away a number of years ago now, we were sitting around reminiscing about stories about him, and my wife said something that kind of just fell out of her mouth, but she sort of meant it too. She said, "They just don't make men like him anymore." And I'm like, "Hey, I'm sitting right here." And she almost didn't think he realized what she was saying, but he was a man of great love, of great conviction. So certainly I get a lot from that. And I think back to he was a medical doctor, and he used to say to me, "Do you think you might be a doctor?" And I'm like, well, maybe, but I never really thought I was going to be a doctor. Now, as I'm older, I kind of have a hope, or that one of my children might be. I have a daughter that's in kinesiology. I have two sons in high school that are in the sciences. I would think about that way. So that would be a way to honor him. So certainly I have him as a mentor. Certainly many of my sports coaches, certainly people in the workplace, almost too many to name. But one other story as far as mentorship that I'll share is happened on my 10th birthday. And another mentor of mine was when I ran down the stairs at home on my 10th birthday. My father proclaimed to me, he said, "Tim, happy 10th birthday." And there was a cake waiting for me and a couple of presents. And he said, "Happy birthday, son. It's now time to get a job." And I'm like, "Get a job? I'm 10." He's like, "We're going to go look for a job." So we went down and we applied for a paper route at the local newspaper. I lived in Victoria, British Columbia at that time, and the Times College newspaper. And we walked up and applied, and they said, "Well, ironically, we have a route available not too far from your house, but you're too young." And my dad said, "Don't worry, I'll sign it for him." So officially the paper route was in my dad's name, but it was really mine and my brother's. My brother was a year younger, so he was only 9. So every morning for the next, I think it was close to 5 years, my dad would wake us up at 6 in the morning, 7 days a week. And he would load us up in the car. We'd drive to where we'd pick up the papers, and then we'd go on the route. And so my dad would drink a coffee while we're running these papers from the car to the different houses. And after a while, I guess my dad got kind of bored. And he was a guy that was entrepreneurial and was working in family business as well. So after a while, we started to get to know the customers that we were delivering to. So he started writing on the newspaper, "Good morning, Mrs. X. Good morning, Mr. X. How are you doing? It's sunshine today." And he'd write these on the papers every day. I never thought much of it until we got a call from the newspaper and said, "We've got faxes," yes, faxes at the time, "of these pictures of these newspapers you're giving out to people, and they're incredibly happy about the service that you're giving them." And I said, "Wow, I never thought about that." So we won this award as the #1 carrier of the month or whatever it was. And that was really my first foray into really caring about customer service and really deeply caring about ways that we can influence customers and make moments of magic for them. And so in that way, I'd certainly say how, two people that were great influences on me were my grandfather and my father.
Oh, it's quite amazing that your dad did that. What examples, what amazing examples, and how fortunate you were to have a grandfather and a father who basically showed you things about life in a way that often we don't even think about, even as adults, right? Oh, I'm so impressed. I want your father. Oh, one of your trademark lines as we're talking about caring, and for you, caring for people is so basic. It's just part of who you are. But your trademark lines in speaking on social media, and that I've heard you say many times, is that your goal is, and that you are magnanimously coaching leaders to love unconditionally, dream audaciously, serve generously, and grow purposefully. As a strategic executive coach, where do you start? How do you even begin to do that with your clients? to love unconditionally, dream audaciously, serve generously, and grow purposefully.
So it really starts with that word magnanimity. And I borrowed that word, if you will, from my good friend Alex Savard, who's written books on this topic. And I really didn't understand leadership till I met him. I understood parts of leadership, but I really didn't understand what it meant. He defined leadership as the word magnanimity. He defines it as striving for greatness by bringing out the greatness in others. Still the greatest single definition I've ever heard about leadership. Magnanimity, striving for greatness by bringing out the greatness in others. So where do you start when you talk about, loving, dreaming, etc., right? Where do you start? It starts with you. And another mentor of mine, Kevin Lawrence, wrote a book called Your Oxygen Mask First. And really all that says is they always tell you on a plane, when the plane's going down, to put your oxygen mask on first before you help the person beside you so that you don't pass out first and you both pass out. So what a great attribute of that as a leader. If I'm not striving for it myself, or see, it says strive, not be or do, because I'm striving for greatness, but I'm still failing in little ways every day. When we talk about, living my priorities, there's times that I slip up, but I'm striving for that. And so when people I'm leading, when people see the leader striving for that same thing, that's really where the magic starts to happen. When they see that person having their back, dreaming with them, showing that love, showing that energy, that's where it happens. So where does it start? It starts with striving for greatness yourself by bringing out the greatness in others. I was doing a seminar yesterday, and they said the same thing. Tim, where do I start? There's these, we were talking about 4 principles that they can implement. And I said, don't even go to your team. Just start doing it yourself. And once you start to do it yourself, then you can go to your team with one principle after another.
That's wise, Tim. That is really wise, because we can't really do anything for others until we do it ourselves, right? And I love that. I find myself getting inspired when I think about striving for greatness, like really, truly working and striving for greatness, and then bringing out the greatness in others. And I just think if we had leaders that did that on an ongoing basis, how different our world would be. Well, as you say, it's one step at a time, one start at a time, one person at a time, starting with themselves. I'm going to wrap up, but before I wrap up, before we close off on this interview, do you have anything that you'd like to share right now? Any comments, anything about yourself, any workshops, anything coming up that you'd like to promote?
So there's certainly things, Dorothea, I think you're going to share in the chat with, how to get a hold of me, but you can certainly reach me through the Lawrence & Co. website, through McKCO forums. The 2 companies I work with most closely is I run peer group forums for business leaders at McKCO forums. And really that's about surrounding yourself with game changers, number 1. Number 2, I do strategic planning with Lawrence & Company. You can find it at lawrenceandco.com. And that's really about taking that strategy and making strategy reality in your business. And then thirdly, I do one-on-one coaching through my own company called Service Leadership. So you can find me online, find me on LinkedIn that way, and you'll certainly have the further contact information in the show notes. But if I could leave you with one story, I'll leave you with this one, and it's probably the story one of the best stories that epitomizes leadership. It's a story about a colonel named Colonel Charlie Plum. And Plum was a pilot on an aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk in the Vietnam War. And he had been flying his missions off of this aircraft carrier for many months now, and he was only a few weeks away from his deployment ending and him being able to go back home. Unfortunately, this was the day that he would be shot down. He got up in the air, and as he was shot down, pulled his parachute, it didn't open. He got down a little bit further, pulled his parachute, didn't open. He made one last ditch effort. His parachute opened, and it saved his life, but he was in enemy territory. He was caught as a prisoner of war for 6 years. Once the war ended and the prisoners were sent back, he was back in America as a war hero. And you can imagine he was giving speeches. And one night he was giving speeches as this war hero in Kansas City. And after the speech, he was in this little diner. And this guy comes up to him and goes, "Charlie Plum, you're Charlie Plum." You can imagine he might have been a bit high on himself at the time. He puffed out his chest. And he said, "Why, yes, I am. You must have seen me speak." And the guy goes, No, never seen you speak." And he said, "Well, how could you possibly know who I am?" And he said, "Well, you're Colonel Charlie Plum, who's on USS Kitty Hawk, right?" And he said, "Yeah, yes, I am. But how would you know that?" He goes, "I was on Kitty Hawk as well, and I packed your parachute." And he goes, "You what?" He goes, "I packed your parachute." See, every night when you came in and landed, and all these pilots landed on the aircraft carrier, we would sleep during the day, we'd get up at night, we'd go in and we'd inspect every parachute. We'd check to see if there were any holes in it to make sure if you ever got shot down, you would be safe. And so that day I packed your parachute. Well, you can imagine Plum at the time is all of a sudden all bashful. He's like, "Oh my goodness, I didn't realize how somebody was packing my parachute every day." And really what leadership is, if I could put it into one story, leadership is about packing parachutes for the people around you. And as you do that, people will begin to pack your own parachute. And isn't really that what leadership is about? Is packing the parachutes for others so they can have your back and pack your own.
Now I'm going to give you a round of applause. Oh, thank you, Tim. Thank you for sharing that story. Thank you so much for agreeing to do the Zoom interview. Lots of information, lots of great tips. Thank you so much. Magnanimously coaching leaders to love unconditionally, dream audaciously, serve generously, and grow purposefully. Tim Dumas. This is Dorothea Hendriks wishing you and wishing Tim mountains of success.